Bauhaus and the New Typography, Chapter 16. Seeing the common ground between fine and applied arts, Walter Gropius wanted to unite art and technology. So he gathered a generation of artists to solve problems of visual design for industry. He believed that artists could breathe a soul into the dead product of the machine. Let's take a look at the timeline. The Bauhaus existed between 1919 and 1933, where the new typography lasted from 1925 to 1932. So the school existed in 3 different German cities: Weimar from 1919 to 25, then Dessau 1925 to 32, and for a very short time in Berlin from 1932 to 33. There were 3 different directors: Walter Gropius first, then Hans Meyer, followed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. The school was closed by its own leadership under pressure from the Nazi regime. So the Bauhaus was a German design school whose faculty and students really shaped the modern design aesthetic. It started in Weimar, Germany, and as director of the Bauhaus, Walter Gropius tried to unite art and technology to solve problems created by industrialism. Now, earlier in a previous chapter, we learned about the Deutsche Werkbund and how they tried to unify artists and craftsmen with industry to elevate the functional and aesthetic qualities of mass production. In the Vienna Secession chapter, perhaps you remember the name Peter Behrens. Well, Gropius had been an assistant to Behrens at his architectural office from 1907 to 1910, and that influenced very much Gropius's perspective, particularly Behrens' theories of proportion and his advocacy of a new objectivity. This is just one of the rare books my husband and I inherited from his architect mother on the Bauhaus, but more about that later. The influences and the impact of the Bauhaus really can't be overstated. Modernism was the most important influence. There was a radical experimentation in all the arts after Germany's defeat in World War I. There was an absence of ornamentation and harmony between function of an object or a building and its design. Radically simplified forms, rationality and functionality, mass production and individualistic artistic spirit could coexist at the Bauhaus, and it had a major impact on art and architecture trends in Western Europe, Canada, the United States, and Israel. Here we see the style qualities of the Bauhaus: sans serif asymmetrical type, delivering the message and communicating. Function, not decoration. So not like Art Nouveau or Art Deco that had a lot of ornate decoration. Purity, clarity, simplicity. New approaches to photography. Extreme scale contrast. Bird's eye, like a bird flying above, or worm's eye, like a worm crawling on the ground below. Montage. Here are the Bauhaus teachers. There were visionaries like Paul Klee, Wassily Kandinsky, Johannes Itten, Lionel Feiniger, and Moholy Nagy. Stained glass, wood, and metal workshops were taught by both an artist and a craftsman and organized along the medieval lines of a master, journeyman, and apprentice. The heart of the student's education was a preliminary course that was established by Johannes Itten, whose goals were to release each student's creative abilities, to develop an understanding of the physical nature of materials, and to teach the fundamental principles of design that underlie all visual art. Well, not much has changed. The Bauhaus really is the model for contemporary graphic design education. I, as well, had a beginning class like that, and at San Diego City College, we have a Design 100 class that aims to do just the same thing that Itten established. No distinction is made between fine and applied art at the Bauhaus. By 1923, when the school launched a major exhibition, the Bauhaus was already evolving away from concern for medievalism, expressionism, and handicraft toward an emphasis on rationalism and design for the machine. Here's a close-up of Walter Gropius. Again, he founded the school by recognizing the common roots of fine and applied visual arts, hoping to unify art and technology. It was hoped that an artistically trained designer could really give new spirit to a machine. And Gropius believed that only the most brilliant ideas were good enough to justify multiplication by industry. This is the work of Lionel Feininger. This woodcut was printed on the title page of the Bauhaus Manifesto, and he was a Bauhaus teacher who learned about De Stijl and introduced it to the Bauhaus community in the spring of 1919. We talked about the preliminary course. Here's the developer who was at the heart of the Bauhaus education, that class. The goals, again, were to release each student's creative abilities so they understood the physical nature of materials and those fundamental design principles that underlie all visual art. These are things like lines and shapes and balance and color. With his methodology of direct experience, he sought to develop perceptual awareness, intellectual abilities, and emotional experience. In 1923, Itten left the Bauhaus because of disagreements about the conduct of the course. Here's a great image that shows a Bauhaus workshop. Again, they were studying how to work with materials like ceramics and metal and glass. And look at these great workspaces they had that were made like from tree trunks. This is Joseph Albers. He was a German-born American artist and educator whose work both in Europe and the US formed the basis of modern art education programs of the 20th century. Upon arrival at Black Mountain College in November of 1933, a student asked him what he was going to teach, and he said, "To open your eyes." And this became the motto, really, of his teaching. You've heard this name before, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. Johannes Itten's replacement as head of the preliminary course was this Hungarian constructivist. He was a restless experimenter who studied law before turning to art. Now, Moholy-Nagy explored painting, photography, film, sculpture, and graphic design. And visual means including kinetic motion, light, and transparency were all part of his wide-ranging investigation. He was young, he was articulate, he marked an influence on the evolution of Bauhaus instruction and philosophy, and he really became Walter Gropius's prime minister at the Bauhaus, as the director was trying to push for a new unity of art and technology. In 1923, when he replaced him, he began to show his passion for typography and photography that inspired an interest in visual communications. And again, that led to important experiments in the unification of words and images, which he referred to as typophotos, the objective integration of word and image to communicate a message with immediacy. He experimented with photograms and photomontages, which he called photoplastics. Here we see a proposed title page he created for Broom magazine in 1923. This inventive design for that avant-garde magazine shows how thoroughly Moholy-Nagy understood Cubism and the work of L. Lissitzky. I'm extremely fond of this piece that he created, which is a typo photo poster for tires. Letter forms, photography, and design elements are all integrated into an immediate and unified communication. Here's a great example of that Bauhaus style characteristic of bird's eye perspective in photography. It's Chairs at Margate. The juxtaposition of these two images creates a contrast of pattern and texture and introduces a process of change into the two-dimensional image. Here's an example of one of Moholy-Nagy's photograms, where light itself becomes a medium for the generation of design and form. Here's a very comical piece he did for the World Foundation. In this satirical photoplastic, he shows quack-clacking super geese or pelicans, observing the simplicity of the world constructed as a show of legs. Now, wisely, the Bauhaus produced books that featured the work of the masters and students, and they mailed them out to industry. This method is still employed at places like Art Center, College of Design, where they have lots of sponsored projects. So when you go to Art Center, for example, they have car design. You might see a classroom that is being guarded because they're developing ideas for the latest car. And many new cars have been developed at Art Center. Same with Coca-Cola, hires them to envision what a new Coca-Cola bottle will look like. This is the work of Juice Schmidt. It's a beautiful Bauhaus exhibition poster that's been widely imitated. Notice the clever lockups of typography when type is aligned with other shapes. This is Herbert Bayer. He was a former Bauhaus student who eventually became a teacher of type and graphic design, and his workshop made striking typographic design innovations along with functional and constructivist ways of thinking. Sans serif fonts were used almost exclusively, and Bayer designed a universal type that reduced the alphabet to clear, simple, and rationally constructed forms. This was consistent with Gropius's advocacy of form following function. Bayer omitted capital letters, arguing that two alphabets, uppercase and lowercase, were incompatible in design, and two totally different signs expressed the same spoken sound. Dynamic composition with strong horizontals and verticals, on occasion diagonals, characterized Bayer's Bauhaus period. So the Bauhaus at Dessau was led by Walter Gropius. Due to tension between the school and the local Weimar government, the Bauhaus moved to Dessau in 1925, and the curriculum was reorganized. The Bauhaus developed clearly understood formal principles that could be applied intelligently to design problems. The Bauhaus Corporation was formed to handle the sale of workshop prototypes to industry, very similar to what I was discussing with Art Center. In 1926, the Bauhaus was renamed Hochschule für Gestaltung, and the influential Bauhaus magazine began publication. This magazine, along with the series of 14 Bauhaus books, disseminated advanced ideas about theory and its application to architecture and design. Wassily Kandinsky, Paul Klee, remember them from the Expressionists? Walter Gropius, Piet Mondrian from De Stijl, Moholy-Nagy, and Theo van Doesburg were editors and authors of volumes in the series. In Dessau, Albers, Marcel Breuer, and Herbert Bayer joined the faculty. Bayer became a professor in the newly formed Typography and Design workshop, which made important typographic design innovations. Hans Meyer, the Swiss architect and second director of the Bauhaus, is pictured next to the image of Gropius. Gropius appointed Meyer directly to the Bauhaus architecture department when it was firmly established in 1927. Meyer brought his radical functionalist philosophy to the school. His philosophy was that architecture was an organizational task without relationship to aesthetics, that buildings should be low cost and designed to fulfill social needs. He was dismissed for allegedly politicizing the school.